Disclaimer: the information and education material contained herein is meant to promote the general understanding and dialogue of GANs processing. Such information is not meant or intended to serve as a substitute for a healthcare professional's clinical training, experience, or judgment. For patients and individuals, such information is not to be a substitute for professional medical, therapeutic, or healthcare advice or counseling. For medical issues or concerns, including decisions about medications and other treatments, readers, viewers, listeners should always consult their physician or, in serious cases, seek immediate assistance from emergency personnel. Prescription information, procedures, and use of medical devices information should be undertaken only by properly trained and certified medical personnel. We specifically disclaim any warranties, express or implied, including implied warranties of merchantability or fitness for a particular purpose. Such information is provided, as is, and is believed to be accurate at the time of its publishing, but it is the viewer's job to evaluate the accuracy of any information found in this presentation. Every case presented is of their own experience, applied by themselves for themselves, and it applies to their case only. Every person experiencing health problems should seek professional medical advice and consult their course of treatment with a doctor. The processes of plasma balancing described herein are a natural process which supports the body but does not replace medical advice or therapies one is already subject to.
And thank you very much, everybody. Thank you for being here. We would like to carry on with the North American Knowledge Team session here. So I hope you enjoy this particular journey. This is the Keshe Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science. My name is Alexander. I am from Canada. It is March the 10th, 2024. And we are continuing in the advanced transmission phase. And today we've talked about quite a lot about pressure and how it affects us all. And this is the Keshe Foundation North America Plasma Education Series. So this is a continuation of all the sessions that we've been having with respect to the advanced teachings. And we've been doing this for many, many years. And so we'd like to carry on with this and try and condense all the thousands of hours of teaching that we've had to do and make it easy for newcomers to come in, because all of the newcomers are having the same hesitancy that we've always had. And the reason for it is because we are physically dominated, and physically dominated at the lowest energy state. That's what the problem is. And so as we walk on this planet, we've made a few discoveries and understanding that rolling is faster than walking. But if we can get up on the horse, and that's even faster, because the horse walking is faster than the man walking. But the point is that as we move step by step or by cycles, we don't know how many steps it takes or how many cycles, because we always want to measure things. And then not only measure the individual things, but how many things to measure, as in how many points do we have. And so when we look at the teachings of Marantavikula Keshe in book number 1, the universal order of creation of matter, and we find the combination of matter, dark matter, and antimatter coming to a point. And that's just one point. And when we look at book number 2, the structure of light, we see that there are 2 points. And there's a connection, and that point has to do with the structure of light. And then, of course, now in book number 3, we have 3 points. The original point of the matter and 2 other universes, the sister universe and man's universe, the origin of the universe. And so as we try and understand this and try and understand how we can navigate through this, we introduced the word transmutation, and we introduced the transmutation through preparation sessions. And so we're in the middle of a set of 6 sessions, with a 3rd one coming up on March 29th. And with these sessions, it allows us to entertain the new technology that has come from the universal body enhancement units and the other communication technology that has come around, and see how we can participate as individuals, as contributors, as knowledge seekers, as explorers, as peacekeepers. And so on Thursdays, we bring the one planet, one nation, one race for justice and world peace. And we've done this 316 times already. And we keep going because world peace is what it's all about. When we say, what is it all about? That's what it's all about. That is the number one goal. So in our search for outer space, we have to understand to get to that point on the plasma highway or that little pie in the sky and understand that there is a beyond. So just to get to that point, we have to do this in peace. And so we seem to be very satisfied with our little tiny perfect world, what we call as part of man's universe. But we seem to ignore the rest of it, and only because we don't have the technology, or we don't have the ability, or we don't have the knowledge. Well, that is absolutely not true, because there is a plasma highway, and part of us is on it. But most of us ignore it because we just focus on the transmission highway. And so that's what we're doing today. We're still discussing the transmission highway because, as you can see, it's the lowest energy state and it involves frequency, but it also involves pressure because all of this is part of the universal embodiment. And so the limitation is the speed of light because that's the fastest transmission. So they say. And we wonder if that is true. And since our tiny little perfect world is only part of the rest of the world, and the rest of the world can only go at the speed of light, and the rest of the world is much bigger, that means the faster you go, the bigger you get. But is that true? Because what is beyond that? And which one is which? Are we that tiny point? Or are we that large point? Or is there another point beyond that point? And we never had an opportunity to answer those questions, although many scientists have tried. But the fundamental reality is that the universe is a manifestation of creation and it exists from energy. And so this is the message that we need to convey to new knowledge seekers, that energy is always in motion and energy is always positive. So when we refer to the charge in the energy, it has to do with the motion. And so when things come together, as in the universal order of creation and matters, they come together in one point. But as we've seen in book number 2, there's one point and there's a reference to another point, and usually you connect to that point. Well, how do you do that? And then we find that you're always doing that. It's not how you do that, it's always being done. All things work in combination. And so, what dimension? What field strength? What energy level? And so here we are in our basic 3 dimensions and our lowest field strength. And yet we were able to make the cups of life, which demonstrated our inner strength, our emotional strength, which complemented our physical strength. But in that regard, we were able to make a product called GANS. Gas is a nanosolid, and this became a part of the manifestation of the interaction of the fields created by the cups of life. But this manifestation was part of a radiance that came from the Earth space interacting with our space, man space. And so as a result, we created this ganses, such as copper GANs and calcium GANs and carbon GANs, zinc GANs, water GANs, amino acid GANs, and that's just to name a few, because there was something going on, and we've seen the rotation, and we've seen the polarity, and we've seen the field strength, but they all came together. And so all of these energies came together as part of the coming together of various dimensions. And so these energies were transmitted. And as they came together, they're still transmitting. And so we've seen that there was a medium in the cups of life, which was made with salt water. But there was a message. And that message manifests itself in GANs. And it was different from each of us. So today's topic is pressure. And as we understand pressure, things that face us in daily life are like deadline pressures, which involve time, social pressures, which involve conformity, family pressures that involves responsibility, and of course, financial pressures that also involves accountability. And for many of us, we feel the pressure and the walls pressing in on us. But we can apply pressure. We could take our hands and bring them together very rapidly in the form of applause. And then what happens is we have this sound pressure. And if we do it in a different way, we can make a big bang. And if we apply pressure in another way, such as with cannons, we can make really big bangs. And so there's a lot of things that we can do with our hands. And so if our point of view is from our point of view, well, of course, we're the smart ones, the animals are the stupid ones. I just wonder who taught the walrus about pressure? Because when they bring their hands together, they brought a lot of water. Another form of clapping. So we can see the effects of pressure. And sometimes it's fun. But why this is important is because we have to understand, as we've talked about in the past, that in order for us to maintain gravitational stability, that has to be through density. And so the gravitational field forces amplify density. And so that gives us our stability. But when we talk about stability, we have to talk about a relationship to something else. And so we find that beyond the magnetosphere of the planet, we have a vacuum. And we see at the core of the planet that we also have a vacuum. And so as we've said, well, what is beyond? You know, that's our little tiny perfect world and everything that we can see, but what's beyond that? And so we identified that as magnetical PM ticks. But the point being that between these two vacuums, and so that means a lack of pressure, between these 2 points is our Earth space. So if we have a vacuum, that means it needs to be filled. And yet we have this gravitational stability. Because if we were to fill the vacuum, and since the Earth is completely surrounded by a vacuum, then the Earth must be of a higher pressure. And yet, the Earth doesn't dissipate into the vacuum. And so the two extremes of this vacuum are diminishing the pressure. And so the whole nature of pressure is that the pressure comes and goes to a lower pressure. Higher pressure goes to a lower pressure. And so we've said all along that the higher energy feeds the lower energy. So there's a similarity between the higher plasma energy feeding the lower plasma energy and the higher pressure moving to the lower pressure. So clearly, if we have a low pressure at the core, and if we have a low pressure surrounding us, neither one of those is contributing to the pressure that keeps this planet together. You know, from our own personal standpoint, we have a skin, and we can pinch ourselves, and we find that we kind of can depress our skin, but then it pops back up again. So there's some kind of internal pressure. Well, isn't that interesting? If at the core we have a vacuum, where does the vacuum begin and where does the pressure point begin? And what causes that pressure? Because it certainly doesn't come from the vacuum. So the external pressure keeps the Earth together. But if we get on the inside, where the Earth is on the outside, then we have a dilemma because we don't know if we're right side up or upside down. And, you know, we don't know if we're inside or outside or inside out. And so we see this internal pressure. And all of this comes from a lack of knowledge. So it's not something that we can deny. It's something that we need to look for. And so what we've seen is that there's something strange here where we have cycle relationships, as we've discussed, between the various dimensions. So for instance, we have the x-axis dimension, which is the circumference of the circle, the circumference of the cycle, if you will. And then we have the y-axis dimension, which is the diameter. But since the diameter goes in every direction, then we have the z-axis dimension, which is basically half the diameter, but in every direction. We call that the radius. And the relationship, whether it's a circle or whether it's a sphere, is constant. It all is constant with relative to pi. So how can it be different if the relationship is constant? And so that becomes the dilemma. So we see that in order to maintain this constancy, we have to have these two feeding dimensions, right? And then we have these three feeding back dimensions. And we still haven't talked about this fourth dimension where we seem to sit as the observer fudger. We're only in the third dimension. And so this becomes the anomaly when you look at the story of Admiral Byrd and how he flew into the center of the Earth. And so there's been many discussions about the hollow Earth. But if we were to talk about the past, And so the short form of the story is that he flew in the South Pole, and he flew in to the Earth, and then he came back out. So this leads us to a lot of questions. One of the questions is, like, where did he go? Because he was supposedly in Antarctica, and we know that Antarctica is very, very cold, and yet he seemed to fly into a tropical zone. And if that was within the hollow earth, then the pathway through the hollow earth would be equivalent to the diameter of the circle. So the question that we have is, if he were to fly in through the South Pole and exit through the North Pole, and we see that the diameter of the Earth is relative to the circumference of the Earth, which is pi, so therefore the diameter is 1 over pi. I wonder if he had enough fuel in his plane to really travel the full diameter, and did he in fact exit on the North Pole? Or did he follow the radius path? In other words, did he go into the South Pole and follow the path of the smaller circumference of the inner Earth, and in fact pull a U-turn and come back out the South Pole? Because of the shorter distance, he would be able to accommodate that because of the limitation of the amount of fuel that he had on the plane. So he certainly did not have enough fuel in the plane to travel around the world. So this discrepancy in distance is something that has never been resolved. And the path that he took has also never been resolved. But the discussion that he went through this inner sphere, and did he go around the inner sphere, or was he in the center of the inner sphere and then basically just did a loop-de-loop? Because as far as we know, we have other constructs with the Earth. So we have a outer atmosphere where we have a vacuum, and we have the core where we have a vacuum, and then we have all these layers in between. And somehow there's a relationship between all these layers. And so we're trying to figure out where that point is. So let's look at a basic thing, what happens when we look at a wave, which is the other part of physics. We have particles and we have waves. And so when we see a raindrop that comes down as a particle, it creates a ripple in the water. And that ripple imparts a pressure on the surface of the water and creates this wave. And so this wave travels from the center, and it travels outward. And it does this by way of pressure. And so that's the interesting thing about water, because water is between the atmosphere and it's part of the biosphere. And it's above the magmasphere because the water is kind of fluid, and so is the magmasphere. But the biosphere, where we are on the surface of the earth and the surface of the water, is part of our living condition. And the nature of the atmosphere, of course, is that when we apply pressure, we can compress it. And when we take water, it's hydraulic where we can put pressure on it and it'll move. But the surface of the earth is rigid. And when we put pressure on that, it crushes, it breaks. So what happens with the magma, which is below the crust? Well, it sometimes becomes a volcano. It ruptures the crust. And then hot lava flows out. It escapes from the magma chamber. And so not only do we have pressure, because that's how the lava comes out, it comes out with pressure, but we also have heat. So we've all come to conclude that the closer we get to the center of the earth, the warmer it gets. And so it only makes sense because the farther we go into the sky, the cooler it gets. So that kind of makes sense. And the higher we get into the sky, the less density there is. So that makes sense. And the deeper we go, well, it becomes more dense. And we know that is true because if a apple falls out of a tree, it is more dense than the air and then falls towards the ground. And that becomes a hazard because it could hit someone in the head. So there's an above the ground and there's a below the ground. And so as we've been trying to figure out how we navigate through these dimensions, we have to consider the x-axis dimension and the y-axis dimension. And we've seen there's a plus side and a minus side. And as we move, there's this rotating field. But, when we introduce the z-axis dimension, that is not just a circle, but is now a sphere. But the same graphing dimensions apply where you have the positive and the negative, and you have the midpoint, which we consider as the 0 point. But, when we look at the wavelength and frequency relationship, first of all, as we change the wavelength, and let's say we increase the wavelength, we will decrease the frequency. So the relationship between the wavelength and the frequency of light is constant. But when we look around, we see all the colors. So each one of these colors, which is constant, is actually overlapping within our vision. So we have to understand that when we see this dimension, we are seeing multiple overlapping visions of this dimension. And we can affect that by altering the wavelength and the frequency. But the point of the matter is that the wavelength can shorten and the frequency can increase, which only makes sense. So when we look at a frequency map, we can see that there are higher frequencies and lower frequencies, and then there are what we call flatline frequencies. But then there are areas beyond as well. So we're only looking at this basic transmission. And so if we look at the wavelength, that means over a distance, the shorter the wavelength, the more frequencies we can put in there. Well, that kind of makes sense, doesn't it? But what accounts for the amplitude? Because we haven't decided on that. Because the only thing that we can put in there is more frequencies and more wavelengths. So where does this amplitude comes from? So it must come from pressure. And this pressure must be an overlapping pressure. So in other words, if you're listening to the radio and you can't hear it, then you will turn up the volume. Well, that's how you increase the amplitude. You're still at the same frequency. You're still at the same wavelength, but now you've changed the amplitude. And so we do the same thing with light. And we do the same thing with a lot of things. So this is what we call the force pressure. Now, the thing about the force is, as we said, something coming from the sky, as it gets closer to the ground, it accelerates. And the faster it goes, the more force it has. And the more force it has, well, then the more pressure it has. So the thing is that when we look at the graph of the x-axis and the y-axis dimension, maybe the nature of this is all wrong. Maybe the zero line doesn't go through the middle, rather it goes below the entire operation. Which is to say that the sphere, the wavelength, and the frequency are all on the positive side. And this is what we said, energy is always positive. And so regardless which dimension you're operating, that is to say, x-axis dimension, y-axis dimension, or z-axis dimension, you're always in the positive side. And the force pressure is always positive. So that would kind of explain why in our biosphere, where we're living, which is above the magmasphere and below the magnetosphere, that takes into account the atmosphere, the waterways, and the land. That's our biosphere. And that is all in the positive force pressure area. And in the negative force pressure is the vacuum at the core and the vacuum beyond the magnetosphere. So, since we have this gravitational stability of the Earth, we find that as the energy comes in and more comes in through the process of attraction, which then has to be absorbed, that creates this gravitational stability. It is this gravitational stability which is what we've been discussing with respect to gravitational pressure. And that becomes part of the MAGRAV system. Our Earth space is part of a MAGRAV system. In order to maintain this gravitational pressure, well, then we have to have an offsetting magnetical pressure. But this magnetical pressure is coming from within. And it goes out, and more goes out through the process of repulsion, and we call this emission. And it gives us magnetical stability. So when we combine the magnetical stability of the Earth and the gravitational stability of the Earth, we have the stability of the Earth. And it is very stable. So this pressure, although it's a high pressure, is relatively stable. And we don't feel it. So when we look at this overlapping nature of our reality, what we call our physical reality, we see time is one nature, and we measure that with speed. Light is another nature. We measure that by intensity. Heat is another measure, and we use thermometers to measure the temperature. And then, of course, pressure, because pressure changes the size. And so the nature of everything that we see physically has this nature about it. And each one of these is overlapping, and they come together and create a picture of. And so when we're trying to figure out in our game of tic-tac-toe whose turn it was, we see the x-axis and the y-axis are trying to figure out who comes first, with the O's, and the z-axis is also disputing this, is coming with the x's. And so what we see is this pressure coming in the center point, and we've seen the coming together of these three dimensions as 6 diamonds. But the thing is that when we look at the periodic table of elements, we don't have anything that represents 6 overlapping natures. And diamonds are not on the periodic table of elements, because the elements are elementary and life is much more complex. And so this is how we know that the sum of the parts is greater than the sum of the parts. And it all comes together from this magnetical pressure. And this magnetical pressure comes from the interaction of the stability of the sun and the stability of the earth. And so that gives us an element. And that element, starting with hydrogen, is a whole bunch of elements, and none of which are diamonds. And yet, when we produce nanocoating, we're producing diamonds. And so the interesting thing is, in the production of diamonds, we use heat and pressure in a special way. And so we can actually create diamonds. And so it stands to reason that the earth, where we mine diamonds, then the earth would create the diamonds the same way, wouldn't it? Under heat and pressure. And since diamonds are pure carbon, carbonate, then, or actually 8 carbon 6s, then although there's only one element, diamonds themselves are not elementary. They're compounds, the compounds of carbon. And so that's their overlapping nature. And that overlapping nature reflects the way light passes through, that they were formed with the heat and the pressure over time. And so they created this binding. And so the whole earth was created through this energy binding. And it's very self-serving, isn't it? Because now you created an element. And so we are on this earth, and we need to be self-serving so that we have the energy to continue our energy binding. But we forget where this pressure came from. And so we manufacture this pressure by stealing from others. And so we get this binding energy at the expense of others. And it's confounding to understand this, because the others that we steal from need this energy for their own binding purposes. So if we're stealing from others, we are stealing their energy. Their energy is at a lower state. And so we're actually getting from a lower energy state a diminished return of resources. And then we find that our neighbor is lacking in resources. And yet our neighbor is part of our community. So you can see how unproductive this is. And yet we've all been forced to follow this plan so that we can maintain our energy binding status, the needs of self-serving. And so we continue to do this at the expense of others. And each of us is doing that at the expense of others. And the worst of us is doing that at the expense of ourselves, because we're forgetting where the MAGRAV condition came from. And it came from this vacuum. And I say, well, if I have the vacuum beyond the magmosphere and I have the vacuum beyond the magnetosphere, and I have this pressure in the biosphere, where did that pressure come from? And why are we not using that pressure? So when we look at the relationship of the axes, the x-axis is rotation, the y-axis is polarity, and the z-axis is the field strength. And so we play with these pressures, we play with these spheres. So one game we play is soccer. And so we apply a kicking pressure, right? That works. But in that pressure, we can do certain things. With skill, we can do a drop kick, or we can put a bounce, or we can put a spin. And so we have the pressure coming in from different areas. And so we can do the same thing with transportation. We have this pressure, and it affects the time and distance. So we use combustion to facilitate that, right? And so we all understand that with the pressure in one direction causes a motion in the other direction. But when we look at the way the planets are moving, they don't have any combustion. And this pressure that arrived here to create this gravitational stability came together as two forces. And when two forces come together and we created this x-axis dimension and this y-axis dimension, and then of course as we captured these fields, we brought in the z-axis dimension. And then when we have these three dimensions, they had to move. They're always moving. And so somehow they had to move to a different position, and they had to do this with pressure. But there was no combustion pressure here. So we found that, we can roll along, and we can do this with cycles. And then we can get inside a containment unit and apply this internal combustion pressure to get it to move. And then we have this rotational pressure, and it repeats, and it constantly repeats. And it keeps repeating as long as it keeps moving. But what happens when it stops? In order to exist, it still has to receive this pressure. And so we find that the difference between the pressure and the vacuum, it too is a two-way street. And so we've seen how things are affected by two dimensions and two directions and two sizes, two variables, two lanes. And all of this has to do with energy in motion, which is either negative or positive. And so the energy can be flowing or binding, where the negative gives and the positive takes. So is the giving because it's negative, or is it negative because of the giving? So we ask the same question with the positive. Is the positive because it takes, or is it positive because it gives? Since it's a two-way street, then the answer is both. And so we see that the condition is that a definite portion of matter occupies a definite part of space at a definite moment in time. So if we have two, then how can we have one and the same energy? We can't. There's no such thing that constitutes a charge at two adjacent increments of time. It's always different. Because it's always moving. And it's always moving based on the principles of flow and connection. And so as we have said with the kicking pressure, is we can apply a spin. And that'll also facilitate a motion. And so when we look at our earth space and how it is part of our embodiment, we have to, in reality, discount our man space because it's undependable. We have too many variables in 3 dimensions. And how many variables do we have? Well, if we say we have 8 billion people on this planet, and that's just today. Well, what about all the people who have been on this planet and all the people who have left it? And what about all the people who are still wanting to come to this planet because people are being born every day and people are leaving every day? So man space is undependable. It's the earth space that is the common denominator, and it's much more dependable. And since the earth space is a maggrav, then we find that since the earth is rotating, cycles are maggrav dependent, and the frequency of the rotation means that the frequencies are maggrav dependent. And since the earth is self-sustaining and contained despite the pressure, then it is maggrav dependent. And so what is it dependent on? And it's dependent on this coexistence filtering of the energy that is based on nearness and proximity. But what is causing that motion? Well, of course, it's pressure. And so we understand that, the faster we go, the higher we have to go. And we keep going faster and higher. So we're walking, or we go on a ship or an airplane, and we go higher to warplanes, and then we go higher to the Peace Dome, and then higher to satellites, and then beyond the magnetosphere into the vacuum above and beyond, but where beyond? So then we go into these overlapping dimensions where we see the 3 dimensions of the sun space and the 3 dimensions of other planets and other moons. And then, of course, that in-between space, wherever that is, because it's everywhere. And so now we understand how the field gets released is because there has to be a pressure to create this Gans binding. And so that's done by excessive input rotation. And we know there's excessive input rotation because eventually our cups of life begin rotating. And then to get this field pressure release, there has to be extreme offsetting. And so this is all part of the plasma reality, the balancing between the magnetic and gravitational field forces which contribute to the plasma stability. And so that's why the plasma is a fan of man, and we cannot suffer from the plasma reality, because the plasma reality is always part of our transmission. And so we can conclude that the release of these binding energies precede the retrieval of the beneficial energies. That is to say, the field release precedes the field capture. The giving precedes the taking, and the emission precedes the absorption. So, but motion cannot exist without coexistence because motion is a product of existence. So, and motion and coexistence reside in both matter states. That is the plasma dominant state and the physical dominant state. But the plasma dominant state precedes the physical dominant state. And that is the point that we want to make, because this point, this centric universe that we bring all our dimensions to, we can conclude that it's not man-space centric. It's probably Earth-space centric. But could it be the sun-space dimension? But we haven't discussed that. So is it dimension centric? Well, the proximity is dimension centric, and the containment is dimension centric. And so the nature of pressure is dimension centric. But what's the message? So if we were to look at this summary of feedback, and then we realize from the pressure of clapping, we get the sound. The sound is the feedback. And from the intensity of the frequency and the interaction with the wavelength, we get the light. And that same thing applies to heat. And then we have this pressure, the difference between the pressure, the vacuum outside of the magnetosphere and the vacuum in our core, and this high pressure in our biosphere. And that is our feedback. And that is the dominance. All of these are the dominance parts of our reality. And that is the difference between, that's the difference between the matter plasma, that is the feeding plasma, and the physical feedback plasma. And we are feedback dominant. That's where the problem lies. So, as we look at the first cache space plasma research teams gathering in the various research centers around the world, at this point in time, the calling is on a physical basis, but truly it's also calling on the plasma basis, because this is advanced technology. And this advanced technology allows us to make new choices because we're in the post-November the 11th of 2023 era. This was the ambassadors meeting in London, where we were looking at the different aspects of outer space, inner space, and Earth space, and how it affects the greater oneness, which we have now celebrated the 10th year anniversary this week with the 528th Knowledge Seekers Workshop, as we continue to transcend the limitations of nuclear science. And as we did in the London conference, we invite you to join us in the Sanya conference, which is starting next week. And so you'll all be able to participate on a plasma basis, utilizing the Peace Dome. So you will actually be able to participate. And this is sponsored by the Cache Brazil Knowledge Team. So this is the Cache Foundation Spaceship Institute Teachings on Plasma Science, and welcoming all the beautiful knowledge seekers. Yes, there's a World Peace Treaty. Sign it with a pen and display it wherever it's obvious. But when you sign it with your heart, and sign it with your soul, and sign it with meaning and intention, because man is cornered in a two-dimensional universe. And can man find heaven through the fields of transmission of vertical motion with the guidance of forward motion and perpendicular rotation? Feeling the pressure of this third dimension of truth. The pressure pushes the message along the physical transmission dimension, but plasma science needs to continue to be delivered daily in exchange for peace on Earth. So welcome to the new outer space age, and that's the end of the lesson. I hope you all enjoyed this class. Does anyone have any questions about this particular subject that I'd like to bring up now? So we are at another watershed position here. It's another watershed beyond the old watershed. And it's another point in history where you want to remember where you were and what you were doing, because things will not be the same. And for those of you who did go to the London conference using this method from the Brazil knowledge team, stand by for quite the emotional ride, because it's history in the making and you were there. So please remember that. And may I remind you, we are all students and we're all teachers. And we have so much to learn. And the reason that we discuss things that we know is because it's a lot easier to talk about things that we know, because we don't know so much. So don't be discouraged by what you don't know. Be encouraged by what you do know, and understand that you are the foundation with the strong shoulders to allow the new knowledge seekers to stand on that and move us forward. We need strong shoulders, and everyone on this panel has that same characteristic, that same nature. So thank you all for being here. And thank you all for allowing me to continue to present. Randy, Elias, anyone else on the panel? Anything else to contribute before I run the disclaimer and end the meeting? Ladies and gentlemen, please remember, not only are the enhancement units on all the time, but the pressure that comes from our souls is active all the time. And when we say pressure, we're not talking about something that is a burden. We're just talking about a fact of nature. And it's something that you can feel. If you have any doubts, you can feel your own blood pressure. And when you're angry, your blood pressure rises. But when your soul is extending out, there's nothing like the plasma pressure of bringing peace on this planet. Because now we're not just enlisting our pressure. We're not just enlisting the pressure of humanity, but we're working in concert with the pressure from our Earth space, which is our home, heaven and earth. So welcome. And thank you again for being here. Please allow me to do the disclaimer to end the meeting, and we'll look forward to seeing you all at the new sessions, starting with the One Nation, One Planet. On Tuesday, is there a testimonial on Monday? Perhaps there is, and also a new Knowledge Seekers Workshop on Thursday. And please remember that the Knowledge Seekers Workshops are available in many different languages around this planet, and we are very much a 7-day-a-week foundation now. So please stay tuned to your Telegram channels to see the upcoming events. And please let other people know that the show is going forward and they don't want to miss the show. So you don't have to pressure them. Just tell them and they will move on their own. Thank you, everybody. Enjoy a beautiful Sunday afternoon.
Hello, Alex.
Yes, Jefferson.
Hi. Hi. Hello, everyone. Thank you, Alex, for your presentation. Teaching was very, very deep. Must to see it again, as usual. And I would like to add something about this meeting at a Brazilian chat in the Telegram.
Great.
Yes, I just gave a suggestion for the group to include one more section on the depending on the fuse, the time zone from where you are, but to include one more on the Monday at night in Brazilian time would be at very early morning and the CET time, and to cover the 4 days of the meeting in such a way that you can give your best intentions for all of them and all this effort, and they can return back home in a safe way, and just wishing the best for them and say thank you to everybody for giving us the opportunity to participate through our soul and through our intentions, and that's a very important, I think, turning point. That's I'd like to add. I don't know the group, maybe they have some problems, and I don't know why only 3 times. It should be 4 in my vision, but I don't know. Thank you, everybody. If you don't have in Brazil, we can make it by ourselves anytime, anywhere that we are. I believe the plasma is free. Thank you, Alex. Thank you, everybody.
Well, thank you very much, Jefferson. I'm sure they're going to take a note of this. If I understand correctly, on the 16th it starts, which would be a Saturday, and then Jefferson, please clarify, you said on a Monday? I thought it's is that a 4-day session? Or what
Yes,
am I?
yes, that's 4 day section, and you have only 3 days of intentions. So that's everything. It's okay. It's starting the right day. The problem is the time zone is very, from Brazil, it's plus 11. From Europe, it's plus, I think, 7 hours. I think from the United States, it's plus 12 or 13 hours. So the way that it was placed, it was okay, the starting time. But the end time, I think we can have one more intentions that will be in the period of the last day in Sanya, that you can be with them to participate. I don't know if I could make it myself clear, Alex.
Certainly, certainly. This 24-hour clock on this world is really hard for everybody. So
Yes,
I think
it's true. It's true. But let's see what's going on. But it'll be wonderful for everybody that is participating in Sanya. That's amazing.
I'm not sure if you can, Jefferson, you could drop a line to Raphael and bring that up, please, if you don't mind. The I think what you've just demonstrated is how much effort Rick Crammond must go through. You know, when you look at the world clock, he's kind of at the end. He's at the
Yeah.
west coast of Canada,
Yes,
and you know, for him to do what he's doing, it's always he's always the day behind. You know, he's on yesterday when, you know, we're on today, and
yes,
it's hard. You can imagine it's hard, and he's been doing this for over 10 years, and that just rolls off the tongue so easily. But if you look at how much work he's been doing, and he's been working with this time zone problem. So I I take your point, and I think we should use that point to demonstrate to everybody else that it is going to be inconvenient, the different time zones. There's no question about it. But that only affects the physicality. That doesn't affect the soul.
yes,
And we know, because when we go to sleep, the soul's, you know, as they say, gallivanting all over the universe. So uh, if we sleep in the daytime, then the soul is traveling in the daytime. If we sleep at nighttime, then the soul is traveling at nighttime. And I don't think the soul is having trouble adjusting to the time zones. I think it's
yeah, no,
only
yeah,
we're the
for
ones
sure.
having the problem,
Yeah,
you know. So,
that,
but we need to make that effort, because uh, without being there in 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 the real time, it's so different. It is incredibly different. And I remember when on November the 11th, when Raphael announced a special session. And the thing
mhm.
was, he only did it on the or did he do it on the 2 days now? And now I can't remember. But it was very emotional, because once we take that time, it's like the 5 minutes of silence that we give. Once we take that time and connect, and there's a delay. There's a delay in the buildup. Now, there's not a delay in the connection. The connection is instantaneous. And this is one of the things I was saying with the universal body enhancement units. It was amazing. It was amazing, the connection. It was almost instantaneous. And it wasn't like you get an electrostatic shock, you know, when you walk over a carpet or something in a dry atmosphere, and you touch a doorknob, and you get this massive shock. That's not the kind of shock I'm talking about. I'm just talking about the realization of the connection and the welcoming, the beauty that is gushing forward. It's fantastic. And we need that if we're going to do communication. You know, even with this Zoom call, we have a time delay, and we try and cope with it, and they're getting better and better all the time because the transmission is better and better. But we have to remember that's a physical transmission in the basic three dimensions. And then we have to realize that the transmission inside these dimensions is a carrier for everything that we're carrying over and above. So each of us on this panel are riding the wave of this transmission dimension, each of us, and we're all overlapping. And we're overlapping what? We hear the sound, we see the pictures, right? We have the feeling. These are all physical manifestations of the dimensional transmission, but we're riding on the transmission. So what is our soul doing? The soul is applying the pressure that is pushing us through these transmission lines, because it's the souls that bring us all together for these meetings. And that's what makes this meeting such an important meeting, because it brings people from all different continents together. And all the people at this meeting, regardless of health condition, have broad, strong shoulders and are laying the foundation, rock solid foundation. Well, I shouldn't say rock solid, let's say gravitationally stable foundation that we need to leap from to progress. And so, as knowledge seekers, we understand that there are other knowledge seekers don't even know that they're knowledge seekers until they make that connection. And so where's that pressure coming from? It's coming from the work that we've done through the Peace Dome. And this is why, the Brazilian team has put together this session, because this was an experiment on November the 11th to see how strong it was. And oh my God, I was fortunate enough to be there. And I can tell you, it was extremely, extremely powerful and extremely moving. It was, again, it wasn't as good as being there, but sharing the moment was as good, definitely, because we could feel the emotion. And when you understand that that's capable and that's possible, then you have to say, well, wait a second. Where is that message coming from? And what is the driving force behind that message? And so is it a pressure that's coming from behind, or is it a calling for, a wanting, a desire that is drawing it together? And so if we understand in the plasma science that it's a two-way street, a give and take, magnetical gravitational interaction, then we can begin to see how things manifest and understand that when we decide to be forceful is the moment that we create limitations. And so this is where we want to exceed the limitations of nuclear science and introduce the world to plasma science. Jefferson, thank you so much for bringing up that subject, and I want to thank you very much for your insistence on continuing to participate in this. People don't understand, how much we contribute in this manner, and we downplay the significance. But when you look at how long we've been doing this, and what are we trying to achieve, and we can measure the successes as we go along, and we have to grab onto those achievements, because that is giving us the drive and the motivation to carry on, because the universe is a benevolent place, and we are part of the creation. This physical reality that we have is a gift of the creation, and it's not something that is exclusive to us. It's all of us have to share in the same gift, and so that gift only gets better when we continue to give that gift. And each of us has our own skill set, each of us has our own way, but each of us has the connection to the Creator. So history is in the making. Thank you all. Have a great day.
Thank you very much for the feedback and thoughts and teaching, Alex. And just to say that when you said the Rick makes a amazing job, and it's amazing, really. It's admirable how he can be and he can control all these things. Probably Rick, it works from outside from this planet. He doesn't need to interact with the time zone, and jet lags and whatever. But that's it. Thank you very much, Alex, everyone.
Thank you, Alex and Jefferson. You are all doing good work.
Yes,
right?
for
This is
sure.
Selena. Yeah, thank you.
Yes,
Thank you.
for sure. Everybody's doing the best that we can doing what I believe we are understanding and developing and growing slowly, but I think in a steady pace. And we are all together in this, and we're gonna make it. The time, it doesn't matter. It doesn't exist in time. So I think we are in the correct way, and with good guiders and teachers and friends, and it's amazing. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you, Jefferson. Thank you, Selena. Randy and Elias, thank you for co-hosting and helping me navigate through this today. And it's always a challenge, and we all rise to that challenge. And I want to thank all the other participants here. Even Claudia is bringing us flowers and the heart, and thank you so much. It's amazing how many people are participating in this, and I have absolutely no idea how many people listen to this afterwards when it's more convenient. But the fact of the matter is that the show just keeps on going, because life wants to live, and life wants to live in peace. So thank you all. We'll bring this meeting to an end, and
I have a comment before we end.
Oh, thank you, Randy.
You brought up Admiral Byrd. I've known the Byrd family for over 20 years. I'm going to call the word pigeonholed one of the family members into a book I was reading about Admiral Byrd, and I simply asked one simple question. Is everything that they're saying about what he did true? No one answered me. No one said yes. No one said more. But the oldest one that I've known for many years looked at me and smiled and said, keep going in what you're doing, and you'll discover what he discovered. The time is nothing more than an illusion. I have one other question to ask any of the knowledge seekers that are here today. Has anyone ever made GANs using the water from the Dead Sea? And if we were to do that, what kind of GANs would that make? Because I have a chance to get some. This is the reason I'm asking that question.
Hi, Randy.
Hi,
Um,
Elias.
Yeah, I'd like to answer my experience with that. I've made the GANs from the sea, from the Zechstein Sea, which I believe is an old seabed in the heart of Europe. And apparently the salt is extremely high in magnesium, and it also has other minerals in there, that which was part of the sea during, I think many millions of years ago. And so I produced the GANs using the caustic method and, traditional caustic KOH, NaOH, mix it with the salt, and it's extremely hot. And I left it there for a few days out in the sun. And then I rinsed part of it out to get the hydroxide, the caustic out. And then basically I have it here. I haven't really used it that much. So I did bake it, but again, I don't have that much experience using it. And I just wanted to give you that information.
Thank you very much.
I understand there's a
Sure.
lot of applications that you can use the minerals from the ancient seas, whether it's the Dead Sea, as you mentioned, or whether it's other seas which are actually the Zechstein, I know, is a very pure deposit because it's been covered up, and so in order to get to the salts, they actually have to excavate, and so they dig very deep. And the reason it's pure is because it hasn't been polluted. And so what comes out has been buried there for millions and millions and millions of years. So I just wanted to share that with everyone. But I think the power of those minerals is there. And when you do turn it into a GANs, or you make GANs out of it, and you take the plasma water, I think there's therapeutic, it does have a lot of therapeutic use. And I guess that remains for us to discover that. Thank you.
What kinds of experience you have after the making that GANs from Dead Sea?
Randy, I think that question was directed to you. Is that correct? That was directed for
Yeah,
Randy?
who make the GANs from the Dead Sea salt
I
water?
haven't made any yet, so I haven't got the
Oh,
water. So
oh,
Elias
okay.
could probably answer that. But the reason I'm asking is because there is a lake about an hour from my hometown that they say the water there is very close to being the same thing as the Dead Sea. And I remember as a kid going there to learn how to swim because you can't sink. So I thought
Yeah.
the other day, if I was to go down there this summer, because I know all the people there for years, and they would allow me to take the water from the sea without a problem, because what they've done is they've spent a few $1 million making an indoor facility so that in the wintertime people can come in and use the water for therapeutic purposes. And it, like Elias said, it is very therapeutic. You do feel really good after. So this is what I'm wondering if you know, it's different when you soak in the water. So we could, you know, the thing is, I was thinking taking that, making a GANS for that, and then making a cream from that for people with skin conditions and things like that. So just something that, another one of my creative projects for the summertime. But it's been a good day, folks. We've learned a lot.
Yeah. Yeah. Good thing. Thank you.
Before we close, I just want to confirm what you've mentioned. Randy, yes, both Alberta and Saskatchewan have massive halide deposits underground. And these halide deposits are extremely rich in minerals, primarily magnesium salts, potassium salts. And in fact, that's where the potash, the fertilizer, comes from. And Saskatchewan, I think, has the world's largest deposit of potash. And these are all, they belong to the family of salts called halides. And so there's just a massive amount buried underneath. And the water that you extract is extremely rich in that mineral brine. And definitely you can use that and make a GANS out of that. And you know, you can probably use it in your because you do have a very good background in using it in health applications. And so yeah, I encourage you to do some research and look into that. And you're definitely sitting on top of a massive resource there. So I just wanted to let you know. Saskatchewan Potash is the largest Canadian producer of potash fertilizer. And just a little brief sort of like snippet there. The British mining company, BHP, at one point, and this goes back, I think, around 20 years ago, they bought a very small mining company, which actually what they did was they drilled multiple holes and they proved up the resource underground, and they laid claims on that resource, and they sold the claims to BHP, which is an English, a very, very old mining company. And they actually sold it for, I think, $300-400 million. The junior basically started as a penny stock on the Vancouver Stock Exchange, or I think it was the Alberta Stock Exchange. It went from, I think, 7 cents, and it went all the way up to $5 in value. And, you know, just to give you an idea of how much rich that area is in terms of its deposits. Thank you.
Thank you, Elias.
Well, just to add, one of the biggest mines that we have for the salt is right here in Ontario underneath Lake Huron. And it's just next to the nuclear reactor. And this is where the management of the reactor are hoping to bury 5 million radioactive spent nuclear rods. So they were hoping to, well, one of the options was to actually bury them in these caverns. They're massive caverns because they were excavating this salt for many, many years. And so these massive caverns can hold these rods, but they dig deep under the Lake Huron, which is part of the Great Lakes. And that waterway feeds the two largest cities in Canada, Toronto and Montreal. So, you know, we don't take care of the environment, we are going to rue the consequences. So I think this kind of thinking has to stop. Because we are all shareholders in this environment.
I was gonna tell you about a lake we have down in the Okanagan Valley outside of Osoyoos.
Hmm.
It's called Spotted Lake. And it's got 60 different minerals in it, and it is definitely got lots of healing purposes. It's dense, it weighs twice as much as water. A 5-gallon pail we weighed them, and it was double. And laying it in the bathtub, I watched my father-in-law just come out of there with energy like you wouldn't believe. And there's definitely something in it. I'm not sure what all the minerals were, but there's 60 in that lake. I just thought I'd mention that. We got lots of beautiful places in Canada that are full of health. I just wanted to mention that.
Oh, that's great. No, thank you very much. And Randy, you've got Diane's contact information, right?
Yes, I do.
Okay. We're gonna try and we have to see what more we can what more we can do from this end. So everybody, please give good intentions from your soul, from Diane, and just it's very important to do this in a timely fashion. And right now, the need is great. So thank you all for being here. Again, any more contributions?
I like to say something.
Yes,
Uh,
Selena, please.
Yeah, for health, we are doing a lot of stuff, but for our mind, we need to do a little bit meditation. If we get time, it would be the best. Because do you know what, the remote viewer, the QHHT, the quantum healing, hypnosis, those kinds of people, when they do their work before they do the meditation too. So for the soul connection, it is very necessary. So if we get time, please do something for your soul. Do little bit meditation or quiet time. It for us and for our earth and everybody. Thank you.
Thank you very much. That's excellent advice. So each of us can contribute in our own way, and this is the most important thing to understand, that each of us have an impact and a relevance, and each of us is equal in that regard. So
Thank you.
thank you so much.